Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku obtained the legendary skill tree. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wind that whipped across the rooftop felt like a physical blow, cold and sharp against Izuku Midoriya's tear-streaked cheeks. It stole the breath from his lungs, leaving behind an icy hollowness that mirrored the cavernous void that had just been carved into his soul. Each gust seemed to whisper the words he just heard, the final, gilded nails in the coffin of his lifelong dream. It's not bad to dream. But you have to be realistic, kid. The voice of All Might, his idol, the symbol of peace, echoed not with booming confidence, but with a tired, pragmatic finality. The hero had deflated before his very eyes, shrinking from a mountain of muscle and optimism into a skeletal man drowning in his own regrets. And with that transformation, Izuku's world had shrunk too, its vibrant colors bleeding out into a monochrome palette of despair. He gripped the cool metal of the safety railing, his knuckles white. Below, the city bustled with life, a symphony of distant traffic and anonymous chatter. People with quirks. People with futures. People who weren't born broken. He had chased a ghost up to this rooftop, and the ghost had told him he was destined to be a ghost himself, an unseen, unheroic spectator in a world of wonders. "I'm sorry." The words were a ragged whisper, swallowed by the wind. He wasn't sure who he was apologizing to. To his mother, for the years of worry and the false hope he'd clung to? To All Might, for wasting his time? Or to the little boy inside him, the one with the wild green hair and the All Might onesie, who had never, ever stopped believing? A tremor of self-loathing shuddered through him. He was pathetic. Crying on a rooftop after being told the simple, obvious truth. He was quirkless. A Deku. Useless. He had known it his whole life. The doctors, his classmates, Kaken, they had all told him. Why did hearing it from All Might feel like a fresh, mortal wound? Because it was All Might. The man whose smile was a promise that anyone could be saved. Izuku had just learned the silent, heartbreaking addendum to that promise, anyone but me. A distant, percussive boom ripped through the urban drone. It was followed by another, louder and closer. Smoke, thick and greasy black, began to curdle into the afternoon sky just a few blocks away. A villain attack. For a moment he just stared. His legs felt like lead, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. His notebook, the one All Might had signed, felt heavy and useless in his pocket. What was the point? His analysis, his muttering, his obsessive fanboying. It was all just the sad hobby of a boy who couldn't accept reality. He should just go home. He should listen to All Might. He should be realistic. But then his legs, those traitorous, stupid limbs, began to move. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a deeply ingrained reflex, a magnetic pull toward the chaos that had governed his entire existence. He stumbled down the rooftop stairs, his mind a maelstrom of self-recrimination even as his feet pounded against the pavement, carrying him toward the disaster. He skidded to a halt at the edge of a growing crowd, the air thick with the acrid smell of burnt sugar and something foul, like sewage. The scene was one of contained pandemonium. A monstrous, amorphous being made of viscous green sludge had taken over a narrow shopping arcade. Its body was a churning, semi-translucent prison, and trapped within its suffocating embrace was a struggling figure. The heroes were already there, but they were stymied. Death Arms was trying to land a punch, but his fist just sank into the fluid monster with a disgusting squelch, his strength useless. Kamui Woods was evacuating civilians, his wood-based quirk a massive fire hazard against the explosions that periodically erupted from the center of the slime. Backdraft was working overtime, trying to contain the fires, but his water was only making the ground slick and spreading the villain's mass. Izuku's mind, a machine honed by a decade of obsessive analysis, kicked into gear against his will. Sludge villain, fluid body negates brute force attacks. Weakness? Doesn't seem to have a solid core. Vulnerable to being scattered, maybe frozen? But the explosions, that's not its quirk. It's the victims. His eyes narrowed, trying to pierce the murky green depths. He saw wild, spiky blonde hair. Red, terrified eyes. And explosions, small and muffled, bursting from a pair of flailing hands. Kaken. The world tilted on its axis. The air left Izuku's lungs in a rush, replaced by a surge of pure, freezing dread. It was Katsuki Bakugo. His childhood friend, his tormentor, the one who had told him to take a swan dive off a roof just this morning. And he was suffocating. He was dying. The crowd's murmurs became a dull roar in his ears. That villain's insane! It absorbed that kid! Why aren't the heroes doing anything? They can't! None of them have the right quirk for this. Izuku saw it then. Amid the fury and the explosions, he saw Bakugo's eyes lock with his for a fraction of a second. The usual arrogance and anger were gone, replaced by something Izuku had never seen in them before, raw, unadulterated terror. It wasn't the look of a rival, or a bully. It was the look of someone pleading, for help. For a hero. And no one was moving. In that moment, Izuku Midoriya stopped thinking. The self-pity, the despair, All Might's words, it all vanished, burned away by an instinct so pure and powerful it was absolute. His feet weren't his own, they were the feet of a hero. And they were already moving. He burst past the police barricade, a blur of green and black. The shouts of the heroes were distant echoes. Hey! Kid! Stop! It's too dangerous! His world had shrunk to a single, desperate goal. Kaken was drowning. He had to do something. His mind raced, not with analysis, but with pure, frantic desperation. What can I do? I have nothing, no quirk, no power, nothing. His hand instinctively went to his yellow backpack. It was all he had. As he sprinted, a strange, electric blue light bloomed at the edge of his vision. It was blinding, accompanied by a sound like 1,000 tiny chimes ringing in perfect harmony, a sound that seemed to exist inside his skull rather than in the world. A wave of text, crisp and angular like something from a video game, scrolled rapidly before his eyes. System initializing. What? Host biometric scanned. Vital signs critical. Adrenaline levels, 1,200% of baseline. He was still running, his lungs burning, the sludge villain looming larger and larger. The pro-hero slugger yelled at him, "You're gonna get yourself killed." Searching for activation prerequisite. Criteria, unyielding heroic resolve in the face of certain death. He saw the villain's slimy pseudopod lash out towards him. Time seemed to slow. He could see the individual ripples in the green ooze, the captured debris swirling within it. Prerequisite met. Legendary skill tree system. Awakened. The cascade of text vanished, replaced by a single, pulsing notification in the top left of his vision. Skill unlocked. Minor adrenaline boost. Effect. Temporarily clears mental fog and marginally increases physical reaction speed. A strange clarity cut through his panic. The tunnel vision receded. The world, which had been a blur of motion, sharpened into focus. His arm, already swinging his backpack, felt a fraction lighter, a fraction faster. He wasn't thinking about throwing it. He was thinking about where to throw it. He saw the villain's massive, bulbous eye swivel towards him. The eye. With a guttural scream that tore from the very depths of his being, he hurled the backpack. It wasn't a strong throw, but it was a perfect one. The corner of his heavy math textbook, right where the metal binder rings were, struck the villain squarely in its central eye. The monster recoiled with a gurgling shriek of pain. Its grip on Bakugo loosened for a barest fraction of a second. It was nothing. It was an instant, but it was enough. Texas smash. A hurricane of wind pressure tore past Izuku, nearly ripping him from his feet. The familiar red, white, and blue form of All Might, larger than life once more, appeared between him and the villain. The hero's fist, a piston of righteous fury, slammed into the sludge monster. The villain didn't just get hit, it atomized, blasted into 1,000 slimy droplets by the sheer force. The pressure changed, and suddenly, rain began to fall. A rain made of villain. Izuku collapsed to his knees, gasping, the phantom blue light in his vision fading away. Bakugo fell nearby, coughing and retching free. It was over. The aftermath was a blur of motion and sound. Paramedics rushed to Bakugo. Pro-heroes swarmed the area. And then 2 of them were standing over Izuku. It wasn't praise. It wasn't concern. It was a lecture. "Are you insane, kid? Death's arms loomed over him, his face a mask of stern disapproval. You could have been killed. You accomplished nothing but getting in the way. There's a difference between being brave and being reckless, Kamui Woods added, his tone sharp. Leaving the hero work to the professionals is a part of being a responsible citizen. Each word was a slap in the face. He hadn't helped. He had just made a scene. He had been a liability. The shame was a physical weight, pressing him down, making it hard to breathe. He saw reporters flocking to Bakugo, praising his bravery and the power of his quirk. Not a single one looked at Izuku. He was just a stupid, quirkless kid who ran into a fight he had no business being in. Then, a shadow fell over him. It was All Might, back in his towering, muscular form. Izuku's heart leaped with a desperate, foolish hope. Maybe now, maybe he'd see. That was the height of recklessness, young man, All Might said, his voice a low rumble, the ever-present smile looking strained. He wasn't looking at Izuku with pride. He was looking at him with the exasperated concern one might show a child who had just run into traffic. I'm sorry, Izuku stammered, his eyes burning with fresh tears. My legs, they just started moving. I couldn't just stand there and watch him die. All Might's expression softened, but only slightly. Your heart is in the right place, I'll grant you that. He glanced around at the other pros, the police, the gawking civilians. But you are a civilian, a quirkless one at that. What you did put not only your own life in danger, but ours as well, by distracting us. Do not do it again. He gave a curt nod, then turned to the throng of reporters, his brilliant smile snapping back into place as he began to answer their questions. There was no secret meeting. No offer. No, you too can be a hero. The path to one for all had not just closed. Izuku now realized it had never even been there for him. All Might had seen his foolish charge not as the spark of a successor, but as a problem to be managed. Humiliation washed over him, so total and absolute that he felt numb. He stumbled to his feet, invisible to the crowd, and began the long, quiet walk home. The sky was turning a bruised orange and purple. His clothes were damp from the villain rain. His body ached. His spirit was shattered into a million pieces. He didn't notice the world around him. He just put one foot in front of the other, his gaze fixed on the cracked pavement. That strange event during the fight, the blue light, the text, it had to be a hallucination. A product of fear and adrenaline. A last, desperate fantasy cooked up by his broken brain. He finally reached his apartment, muttering a quiet, automatic "I'm home" as he slipped inside. His mother was out, likely doing a late shift. The silence of the small apartment was a comfort. He trudged to his room, a shrine to a god who had rejected him, and closed the door. He slid to the floor, his back against the door, and finally let the tears fall freely. Sobs racked his thin frame, raw and silent. He was a failure. A joke. A Deku. He had proven everyone right. He sat there for what felt like an eternity, adrift in a sea of misery. Eventually, the tears subsided, leaving him hollow and exhausted. He stared blankly at his All Might posters, the familiar, heroic smile now feeling like a mockery. And then, it happened again. A soft ding echoed in his head. In the dim light of his room, a pane of shimmering, semi-transparent blue light materialized in front of him. It hung in the air, about 2 feet from his face, steady and very, very real. Izuku froze, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't a hallucination. It was too clear, too detailed. In the center of the pane, in crisp white text, were the words, Status, Name, Izuku Midoriya, Level 1, Title, The Unyielding, HP, Health points 80/80ths, SP, Stamina points 35/110, FP, Focus points 60/60ths, Strength, STRE, Durability, DRE, Agility, AGID, Intelligence, INTB, Wisdom, WISC, Charisma, CHAD, Unspent Stat Points 0, Unspent Skill Points 1. His eyes widened, darting over the information. Level 1? Stats? It looked exactly like the status screen from his favorite RPG, Ancient Scrolls Online. He tentatively reached out a hand, his fingers trembling. They passed right through the screen as if it were nothing but light and air. Beneath the status box, there were other tabs, labeled Skill Tree, Inventory, Quests, and LOG. His heart was hammering against his ribs now, a frantic drumbeat of disbelief and a terrifying, fragile spark of something he hadn't felt in hours, curiosity. With a thought, he focused on the log tab. The screen flickered and changed. System log. 1634 prerequisite met, unyielding heroic resolve. 1634 legendary skill tree system. Awakened. 1634 title acquired, the unyielding. 1635 skill unlocked via extreme duress, minor adrenaline boost. 1637 legendary act of bravery performed, charge a superior foe to save another. 1637 500 XP gained. 1637 level up. Level 1 reached. 1637 1 skill point awarded. He stared at the words, his mind reeling. Legendary act of bravery. The world had called him reckless, foolish, a liability. But this thing, it had called him a hero. It had rewarded him for it. The 500 XP, the level up, the skill point, it was validation. It was objective, undeniable proof that what he did mattered, even if only to this bizarre system no one else could see. A shaky, hysterical laugh escaped his lips. A quirk. He had a quirk. All this time. It wasn't flashy like Kaken's or powerful like All Might's. It was a video game interface. A system, hidden, dormant, waiting for him to prove he was worthy. He wasn't quirkless. He just had the world's most complicated and delayed power. His trembling finger of thought tapped on the skill tree tab. The status screen dissolved, replaced by an image of breathtaking complexity. It was a colossal, ethereal tree made of shimmering starlight. Its roots were a tangled mass at the bottom of the screen, and its canopy stretched up into an unseen infinity. Four massive, distinct boughs grew from the main trunk, each glowing with a different colored light. The first, on the left, glowed a fierce, burning crimson. The label beneath it read, Path of the Warrior. It represented physical power. The second, branching upwards, pulsed with a cool, intellectual sapphire blue, Path of the Scholar. The domain of the mind and analysis. The third, on the right, shone with a warm, protective golden light, Path of the Guardian. Skills of defense, support, and protection. And the fourth, twisting down and away from the others, was a deep, mysterious violet, Path of the Shadow. Stealth, utility, and unconventional tactics. Most of the tree was grayed out. Thousands upon thousands of skills, represented by small nodes of light, were dark and inaccessible. But at the very base of each of the four main branches, a single skill flickered, available for purchase. He focused on the warrior path. The first skill was basic physical conditioning. Basic physical conditioning, passive, cost, 1 SP. Greatness is built upon a solid foundation. This skill provides a passive, systematic enhancement to muscular and skeletal development during physical exertion. Increases XP gain from all physical training activities by 10%. He examined the scholar path. Basic mental fortitude. Basic mental fortitude, passive, cost, 1 SP. A sharp mind requires a sturdy vessel. This skill reinforces neural pathways, increasing resistance to mental fatigue and distraction. Increases XP gain from all academic and analytical activities by 10%. The Guardian path offered basic resilience, which promised minor damage reduction. The Shadow path offered basic acrobatics, improving balance and coordination. 1 skill point. 1 choice. His entire life, he had been let down by his body. Frail, weak, unable to keep up. His mind was his only asset, the one thing he had honed through years of thankless analysis. The scholar path was tempting. It would be playing to his strengths, but All Might's words echoed again. You have to be realistic. His physical stats were a pathetic litany of E's and D's. His stamina was critically low. His heroic charge today had been pure spirit, but his body had barely been able to keep up. If he wanted to be a hero, a real hero who could fight and save people, he couldn't just be a brain in a jar. He needed a body that wouldn't fail him. He needed a foundation. He looked back at the glowing red branch, at the promise held within that first, simple skill. It wasn't about a sudden burst of power. It was about earning it. It was about taking the one thing he did have, his relentless, almost fanatical determination, and using it to build himself from the ground up. This system wouldn't give him power for free. It would give him the means to seize it for himself. His resolve hardened. He knew what he had to do. Focusing his intent, he directed his single, precious skill point toward the basic physical conditioning node on the path of the warrior. Confirm allocation of 1 skill point to basic physical conditioning? Y/N. He thought. Yes. The screen flashed. The skill point vanished from his status, and the node on the warrior tree flared with brilliant crimson light before settling into a steady, permanent glow. And then he felt it. It wasn't an explosion of power. It wasn't a sudden inflation of muscle. It was a deep, pervasive warmth that started in his chest and spread through his entire body like a slow, warm current. The aches and bruises from his frantic sprint and collapse seemed to lessen. The profound, soul-deep exhaustion that had settled in his bones began to recede, replaced by a quiet, thrumming energy. It was the feeling of a promise being kept. The feeling of a locked door creaking open. Tears welled in his eyes again, but these were not tears of despair. They were tears of overwhelming, impossible hope. He looked at his hands, no longer seeing the frail, useless appendages of a quirkless boy. He saw potential. He saw a path. The world had told him he couldn't be a hero. His idol had told him to give up. But on the worst day of his life, something deep within him, a power beyond his wildest dreams, had looked at his single, desperate, heroic act and said, "Begin." He clenched his fist, the strange warmth still tingling in his muscles. The road ahead was impossibly long. The tree was vast and dark. But for the first time, there was a road. He wasn't quirkless anymore. He was level 1. And he had a world of XP to grind. The warmth that had suffused Izuku's limbs was not a fleeting sensation. It lingered, a low, constant hum beneath the surface of his skin, a stark contrast to the icy despair that had gripped him only an hour before. He sat on the floor of his bedroom, the blue light interface of his new reality hovering before him, its steady glow a beacon in the twilight of his room. He had a quirk. The thought was so monumental, so reality-shattering, that it threatened to send him into a spiral of hysterical laughter or tears all over again. For 15 years, he had been defined by a lack, a zero, an absence. Now, he possessed a power of such absurd, esoteric complexity that he had no frame of reference for it. It wasn't a quirk you were born with. It was a quirk you had to earn. He dismissed the skill tree with a thought, the starry vista collapsing into nothing, and brought his status screen back up. HP 80/80ths. SP 45/110. His stamina points had recovered slightly, the exhaustion from the day's traumatic events beginning to fade under the influence of his new basic physical conditioning skill. This was tangible, measurable, real. A frantic energy, born of newfound hope, seized him. He couldn't just sit here. He needed to test it. He needed to understand the mechanics of this system. Increases XP gain from all physical training activities by 10%. The skill's description was his first clue. XP wasn't just for legendary acts. It was for training. He scrambled to his feet, a wild look in his eyes. In the small, cramped space of his room, he dropped to the floor and assumed a push-up position. His form was terrible, his arms shaking from the get-go. He was still the same weak Izuku he had been this morning. He pushed down, his chest touching the floor, and then strained to push back up. His arms screamed in protest, his muscles quivering violently. He completed one. It was pathetic. He collapsed onto the rug, breathing heavily. And then, he heard it. A soft, satisfying ding in his mind. A tiny notification popped into existence in his vision. 1 XP. Izuku stared at the spot where the notification had faded, his jaw slack. 1 push-up. 1 experience point. It was so little. It was everything. He did another, then another, his body trembling with the effort. Ding. Ding. Each one, a confirmation. Each one, a step forward. He managed 10 before his arms gave out completely and he lay sprawled on the floor, sweat beading on his forehead, a massive, goofy grin spreading across his face. 10 XP. He was at 10 to 200 XP to the next level. This was his path. This was the way. But push-ups in his room wouldn't be enough. He needed something more. A plan. A regimen. His mind, the analytical engine he had honed for a decade, began to churn. He needed a place to train, somewhere he could go all out without drawing attention. He needed a challenge, a monumental task that would push his body to its absolute limits and beyond. Day after day, his thoughts drifted to All Might. To the story of how the symbol of peace had trained his own chosen successor. It was a story Izuku wasn't privy to in this timeline, a secret kept. But Izuku knew the city. He knew its forgotten places. And one, in particular, came to mind. A place that had once been beautiful, but was now a symbol of civic neglect. A place All Might himself had lamented in an old interview. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. The next morning, before the sun had even begun to hint at its arrival, Izuku was there. The air was cool and heavy with the smell of salt, brine, and a decade's worth of illegally dumped garbage. The sight was even worse than he remembered. Mountains of rusted appliances, tangled fishing nets, soggy furniture, and countless bags of refuse choked the shoreline, piled so high they formed a jagged, artificial cliff line against the gray pre-dawn sky. The ocean's waves lapped pathetically at the edges of the filth, unable to reclaim the sand. To anyone else, it was a disgusting, depressing wasteland. A testament to decay. To Izuku, seeing it through the lens of his newfound system, it was a gold mine. No, it was a dungeon. A vast, sprawling starting zone teeming with non-combatant objectives. Each broken refrigerator, each waterlogged couch, each bag of sodden trash was a quest item. Each one was a repository of experience points just waiting to be claimed. His heart thudded with grim determination. This would be his crucible. For the next 10 months, until the UA entrance exam, this place would be his entire world. He set his bag down on a relatively clean patch of pavement, and surveyed the scene, his analyst's mind already formulating a plan. He'd need gloves. He'd need to separate recyclables from landfill waste. He'd need a strategy. But first, he needed a baseline. He walked up to the nearest large object, a refrigerator that had turned a sickly, rust-pocked orange. Its door was missing, and it was half buried in the sand. He bent his knees, got a firm grip on its side, and pulled. Nothing happened. He gritted his teeth, putting his back into it. His sneakers slipped in the loose sand. The fridge didn't budge an inch. A grunt of frustration escaped him. He could feel the pathetic weakness in his arms, the lack of a solid core in his body. His strength stat was still E. Basic physical conditioning wasn't a miracle cure, it was a catalyst. The work still had to be done. He felt a flash of the old despair, the familiar voice whispering, "You're too weak." But then he looked at his hands, at the phantom warmth that still lingered. He had a path now. He just had to walk it. Defeated by the refrigerator, he turned his attention to something smaller, a car tire half filled with stagnant, murky water. It was still heavy, awkward, and disgusting, but it was manageable. He heaved it up, his muscles screaming, and began to drag it toward the designated pickup area by the street. The journey was only 50 meters, but by the end, his lungs were burning and his arms felt like jelly. Ding! 5 XP. He dropped the tire and leaned against the street lamp, panting. A small victory. He looked back at the mountain of trash. It was daunting. It was perfect. He spent the next 3 hours dragging tires, hauling bags, and collecting smaller scraps of metal, earning a slow but steady trickle of XP. By the time the sun was fully up, he was drenched in sweat, covered in filth, and more exhausted than he had ever been in his life. But his XP bar was slowly climbing. This became his routine. Every morning before school, he was at the beach, grinding. Every evening after school, he was back, working until his SP bar was completely depleted and he could barely stand. He learned to pace himself, to listen to the system's feedback. When his SP was low, his XP gains diminished. Pushing himself to the point of collapse was inefficient. Rest was part of the training. He bought thick work gloves and steel-toed boots. He created a schedule, dividing the beach into a grid and resolving to clear one square at a time. The first 2 months were agony. His body, unused to such punishment, ached constantly. He came home each night, showered, and collapsed into bed, his muscles screaming. But every morning, the basic physical conditioning skill had done its work. The soreness was a little less, the recovery a little faster. And his stats were slowly, painstakingly inching upwards. One evening, about a month in, he was taking a forced break, his SP bar flashing a dangerous red. He sat on a cleared patch of sand, massaging his aching shoulders and scrolling through hero news on his phone. A video popped up of the new hero, Empty Lady, making her debut. Without thinking, the old habit took over. Okay, so her quirk is gigantification. He began to mutter, his voice raspy from exertion. Incredible power and range, obviously, but look at the collateral damage. She's limited to open spaces, big streets, a narrow alleyway like the one with the sludge villain, and she's useless. Her size is also a massive target. A villain with a high-powered projectile quirk could cripple her. And what about her costume? It seems to be made of a hyperdurable stretch material, but there must be a limit. Also, her human-sized strength doesn't seem to scale perfectly. She's strong, but not proportionately as strong as she is big. Her best application would be as a mobile barricade or for large-scale evacuations, not precision combat. Ding! The sound made him jump. A different kind of notification appeared, this one tinged with blue. 3xp analysis. Izuku blinked. He stared at his phone, then at the empty space where the notification had been. He'd been so focused on the physical grind, on the path of the warrior, that he had completely forgotten about the other branches of his skill tree. A slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't a hobby. It wasn't a weird, creepy habit. His muttering, his obsessive analysis, his notebooks filled with theories and weaknesses, it was a form of training. It was how he leveled up his mind. This discovery revolutionized his schedule. The grind was no longer just physical. His day became a tripartite system of development. The morning, pure physical conditioning. Before heading to the beach, he would run, do push-ups, sit-ups, and squats. This provided a baseline of XP and warmed him up for the day's real work. The Dagoba Datapint. His grueling, hours-long cleanup of the beach. This was his primary source of XP, targeting his strength and, more importantly, his endurance. The evening, the study. After showering and eating, he would dedicate 2 hours to purely mental work. He did his school homework with intense focus, earning tiny trickles of INT XP. Then, he would dive into his hero analysis. He rewatched old fight footage, scoured online forums, and filled new notebooks, now designated as scholar tomes in his mind, with even more detailed breakdowns than before. Each insight, each connection he made, rewarded him with scholar XP. By the end of the second month, he heard the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Level up! Level 5 reached. All stats marginally increased. HP/SP/FP fully restored. 1 skill point awarded. He had accumulated 4 skill points from leveling up. He now had 5 in total. That night, sitting on a pile of sorted plastic bottles under the moonlight, he opened his skill tree. The crimson path of the warrior beckoned. Just beyond basic physical conditioning, 2 new skills were now available. Strength I passive cost 2 SP, unlocks the next tier of physical power. Increases base STR parameter and improves the body's ability to exert force. Endurance I passive cost 2 SP, unlocks the next tier of physical stamina. Increases base SP pool and improves recovery rate from exertion. It was a heavy investment, 4 of his 5 points. But it was exactly what he needed. The heavy lifting was his biggest bottleneck. With a deep breath, he confirmed the allocation. A surge of power, much more potent than the first, flooded his body. It wasn't a sudden bulking up, but a deep, solidifying feeling, as if his muscles had become denser, his ligaments stronger. He felt sturdy. With his last point, he turned to the sapphire blue scholar tree. Beyond basic mental fortitude, which he resolved to get later, was the skill that defined him. Quirk Analysis I, active/passive, cost 1 SP. Your mind is a weapon. Passively increases the rate of scholar XP gain from analyzing quirks. When actively used on a target, provides basic information about quirk type and general function. He didn't hesitate. He purchased it immediately. A cool, pleasant tingling spread through his temples. He looked at a video on his phone of Endeavor fighting a villain. Before, he just saw fire. Now, when he focused, a faint blue overlay appeared in his vision. He saw lines of text: quirk type, emitter, function, pyrokinesis, range, variable. It was basic information he already knew, but the system was confirming it. It was enhancing his natural talent, giving it structure. The next day, he went back to the rust-pocked refrigerator. He took his stance, gripped the edge and pulled. This time, with a groan that was more effort than pain, the appliance scraped through the sand, moving. It was still incredibly heavy, but it was no longer impossible. The months bled into one another, marked by the shrinking piles of trash and his rising level. Month 4, he hit level 8. A significant portion of the beach near the entrance was now pristine, shocking the few locals who passed by. His body had undergone a visible transformation. The soft, undefined lines of his youth were gone, replaced by the lean, hard muscle of an athlete. His shoulders were broader, his arms and back defined. He had to ask his mother for money for new school uniforms, as his old ones were becoming tight across the chest and back. Inko Midoriya, seeing her son glowing with health and purpose, happily obliged, her eyes misty with a relief she couldn't quite articulate. Month 5, the mountains of trash were now just large hills. Navigating the treacherous, shifting piles was becoming a problem. He'd slipped more than once, earning a few nasty cuts and a sprained ankle that the system thankfully healed in a couple of days, a passive benefit of his increasing DUR stat. It was time to invest in utility. He'd saved a skill point, and he now unlocked the first skill in the violet path of the shadow. Parkour I passive cost 1 SP. The world is your playground. Increases balance, spatial awareness, and the body's ability to efficiently traverse complex environments. The effect was immediate. The next day, climbing a heap of junk felt different. His feet found purchase more easily. He instinctively knew which surfaces would hold his weight, and which would shift. He moved with a newfound confidence, his movements becoming more fluid, less clumsy. He was not just clearing the dungeon, he was learning to master its terrain. It was during the 7th month that the encounter happened. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the sky a brilliant cloudless blue. Izuku, shirtless and slick with sweat, was in the process of hauling a waterlogged, dismembered couch toward a large dumpster. He was in the zone, his muscles working in a familiar rhythm, his mind focused on the steady drip of XP. He didn't notice the skeletal figure walking along the newly cleared promenade, a plastic bag of groceries in one hand. Toshinori Yagi stopped dead in his tracks. He had come here on a whim, a pang of guilt gnawing at him. He often came to this beach to think. It was where he had trained, where he had passed on one for all to young Togata Mirio, his chosen successor at UA. He still felt a twinge of regret about the other boy, the green-haired one with the fire in his eyes. He had been harsh, perhaps too harsh. He'd felt the need to protect the boy from a dream that would get him killed. He expected to find the beach as filthy as ever, a fitting reflection of his own melancholy. Instead, he found a miracle. A massive stretch of the coastline, at least 2/3 of it, was spotless. The sand was clean, glistening in the sun, and in the middle of the remaining junk pile was a figure of furious industry. A young man, with a familiar shock of green hair, was single-handedly wrestling with a piece of furniture that should have required 2, if not 3, people to move. Toshinori's jaw dropped. It was the boy. The quirkless boy from the rooftop. But it wasn't. The boy he remembered was scrawny, all frantic energy and desperate hope. This young man was built, not bulky like a bodybuilder, but wiry and powerful, his back a landscape of defined, functional muscle that contracted with each pull. Izuku finally heaved the last piece of the couch into the dumpster and turned, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a gloved hand. He saw the tall, emaciated man staring at him, and his body went rigid. It was the man from the rooftop. All Might. An awkward silence stretched between them. Toshinori was utterly flabbergasted, his mind struggling to reconcile the boy he had dismissed with the force of nature he was now witnessing. Izuku was wary, his guard immediately up. He half expected another lecture. "Young man," Toshinori finally managed, his voice thin and reedy. I remember you." Izuku gave a curt, stiff nod. "Yes, sir." He didn't offer his name, What is all this? Tashinori gestured vaguely at the clean beach, then at the dumpster, then at Izuku himself. Are you responsible for this? Just doing some community service, Izuku said, his tone carefully neutral. He began pulling off his work gloves, not wanting to prolong the conversation. Community service? Tashinori took a few steps closer, his skeletal frame seeming even more fragile next to Izuku's vibrant health. My boy, this isn't community service. This is a Herculean labor. You've cleaned most of the beach by yourself. I've had a lot of free time. Izuku deflected, turning to grab his water bottle. Tashinori's eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned him up and down. The boy was fit, incredibly so. He was carrying himself with a quiet confidence that was a world away from the weeping fanboy he'd met months ago. A desperate, foolish thought sparked in Tashinori's mind. Had the boy developed a late-blooming quirk? You look well, Tashinori said, fishing. You've been training? Decided to get in shape for the UA exam, Izuku replied, taking a long drink of water. He was deliberately being vague. His system was his secret, a treasure he would guard with his life. He didn't owe this man any explanations. The man had made his judgment of Izuku clear. The statement hit Tashinori like a physical blow. The boy was still trying. After everything he'd said, after telling him it was impossible, the boy had not given up. He had simply gone and found another way. He hadn't waited for a handout, or a miracle. He had started building his own. A profound, complicated emotion swelled in Tashinori's chest, a mixture of shock, deep respect, and a heavy, sinking feeling of having made a terrible misjudgment. I see, Tashinori said, his voice barely a whisper. He felt a fool. He had seen a quirkless child and seen only fragility. He had failed to see the steel in the boy's spine. Well, keep up the good work, young man. He turned and walked away, his mind in a turmoil. He had chosen Mirio for his bright spirit, his control, his heroic heart. He was a perfect vessel for one for all. But as he glanced back at the Midoriya boy, now starting to organize a pile of scrap metal with disciplined efficiency, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had overlooked a different, perhaps even rarer, form of greatness. Izuku watched him go, a strange sense of closure settling over him. He wasn't angry anymore. He was just focused. All Might's validation, which he had once craved more than anything, no longer mattered. He had his own system of validation now. It was coded in XP, levels, and skills. It was objective. It was his. The final 3 months were a blur of intense activity. He cleared the last of the trash. The entire beach was pristine. His training evolved. Now, he ran on the soft sand to build his leg strength. He hauled driftwood logs, swam against the current, and practiced the movements from his parkour skill, turning a nearby retaining wall into his personal training course. He reached level 15 a week before the exam. He had invested his points methodically, bringing his strength and endurance to rank 2, and unlocking agility I. His stats, once a collection of ES and DS, were now mostly solid CS, with his intelligence holding strong at AB. He was no superhero. He was an elite, well-rounded athlete with a supercomputer for a brain. On the morning of the UA entrance exam, Izuku Midoriya stood on the shores of Dagoba Beach. The sun was rising, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The air was clean, carrying only the scent of the sea. The gentle waves washed over sand that was, for the first time in a decade, completely clean. He looked down at his reflection in a clear, shallow tide pool. The boy looking back at him was not the one from 10 months ago. The face was the same, the freckles, the wide, green eyes, the unruly mop of hair, but it was leaner, sharper. The eyes held no trace of fear or desperation. They were calm, focused, and fiercely alive. His body was a testament to his work, a compact, powerful frame built of lean muscle and unwavering resolve. He wore a simple black tracksuit, but it couldn't hide the strength he now carried. With a thought, he called up his status screen, the blue light, almost invisible in the bright morning. Name, Izuku Midoriya, level 15. Title, The Unyielding. HP, 450/450. SP, 510/510. FP, 220/220. Strength, STRC. Durability, DURC. agility AGIC, intelligence INTB, wisdom WISC, charisma CHAD, unspent stat points 0, unspent skill points 1. He had saved 1 point, just in case. A strategic reserve. He had started at level 1, a boy with nothing but a dream and a strange, impossible power. He had faced a mountain of trash that represented his own weakness, and piece by piece, he had conquered it. He hadn't been given power. He had forged it, through sweat, pain, and relentless, grinding effort. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath of the clean salt air. The entrance exam wasn't an obstacle to be feared. It was the next quest. It was the boss battle of the starting zone, and he wasn't going in with a borrowed, uncontrollable explosion of power. He was going in with a versatile skill set, a brilliant tactical mind, and a body he had built from the ground up. He was Izuku Midoriya, level 15. And he was ready. The air in the UA High Auditorium was thick enough to taste. It was a cocktail of nervous sweat, expensive hair gel, and the electric, almost frantic energy of several hundred teenagers whose lifelong dreams were about to be put to the test. Izuku Midoriya, sitting in the near middle of the vast, darkened hall, was an island of calm in a churning sea of anxiety. He wasn't immune to the pressure. A low thrum of adrenaline pulsed beneath his skin, his system's SP bar full and waiting. But the terror that would have once paralyzed him was absent. 10 months of grinding, of pain and progress, had forged a new kind of confidence within him. It wasn't arrogance. It was the quiet assurance of a craftsman who knows his tools inside and out. His body was his workshop, his skills were his tools, and this exam was his final project. He subtly scanned the crowd. He saw a boy with engines in his calves bouncing his leg with repressed energy. He saw a girl with pink skin and horns chatting excitedly with another who had earphone jacks hanging from her lobes. And then, a few rows ahead and to the left, he saw the explosive silhouette of Katsuki Bakugo's hair. Kaken was leaning forward, radiating an aura of predatory impatience, his knuckles white where he gripped the seat in front of him. He looked like a caged tiger waiting for the door to be thrown open. Their paths had barely crossed in the last 10 months, a few tense glares in the school hallway being the extent of their interaction. Izuku felt no fear, only a distant, analytical curiosity. For all you examinee listeners tuning in, welcome to my live show! The sudden, ear-splitting voice of President Mike blasted from the stage, making half the auditorium jump. A spotlight slammed down on the pro hero, his ridiculous hair and leather jacket a stark contrast to the formal setting. Everybody say hey! Silence. A profound, awkward, cricket-chirping silence. Izuku felt a ghost of a smile touch his lips. He focused on the hero, and his quirk analysis eye skill passively fed him information. Hero name, Present Mic, quirk voice, type emitter, function, amplifies user's vocal cords to sonic weapon levels. Observation, requires directional control to avoid friendly fire. Potential weakness, sore throat? Line of sight for focused attacks? A small notification chimed in his mind. 2 int XP. His analysis was becoming second nature, a constant background process. He wasn't just watching, he was learning. He found himself cataloging the quirks of the students around him. A boy who could pull his eyeballs out. A girl who could create objects from her body, based on the lipid content she'd consumed. The sheer variety was a data goldmine. What's the deal, my listeners? Tough crowd. Alright, let's get to the main event. Are you ready? President Mike launched into a high-speed explanation of the practical exam. It was a 10-minute mock urban battle. Examinees would be split into different battle centers to avoid teaming up with friends. The objective was to score points by disabling robotic villains, each worth 1, 2, or 3 points based on their difficulty. Think of it like a video game. Use your flashy quirks to smash those villains and rack up that high score. As the hero spoke, Izuku's muttering habit, long since repurposed into a training method, kicked in. He spoke under his breath, his voice a low, rapid hum. Okay, so a tiered point system incentivizes risk versus reward. The 3-pointers are likely tougher, but more efficient if you can take them down quickly. 1-pointers are probably numerous but time-consuming. The optimal strategy would be to find a balance, focusing on 2-pointers while taking out 1-pointers of opportunity. Speed and endurance will be key. My agility and endurance too are perfectly suited for this. The environment is urban, so parkour will be critical for navigating rooftops and alleys to bypass choke points and engage targets efficiently. And you! A sharp, accusatory voice cut through his muttering. The boy with the engines in his calves, who had been sitting a few seats away, was now standing, his arm a rigid line pointing directly at Izuku. You have been muttering non-stop since the presentation began. It is incredibly distracting. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave. Izuku looked up, blinking. The old Izuku would have stammered, flailed, and turned beet red. The new Izuku simply met the boy's stern gaze, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. My apologies, he said, his voice quiet but steady. It's a focus method. It won't happen again. He gave a slight bow of his head and genuinely went silent. He didn't need to speak to think. His mind was already running a dozen different scenarios. The boy, taken aback by the lack of a flustered response, looked momentarily confused before huffing and sitting back down, though not before firing off another question to present Mike about a mysterious fourth robot on the handout. Present Mike explained that this was the 0-point obstacle, a gimmick to be avoided. A massive, dangerous robot with no point value, an arena boss, Izuku thought. High threat, no reward. Purely an environmental hazard. The test isn't just about combat prowess, it's about threat assessment and resource management. 5 and XP. The briefing concluded, and they were herded towards buses that would take them to their assigned battle centers. Izuku found himself at Battle Center B. As he stepped off the bus, he saw a familiar face, the kind-looking girl with the round cheeks who had stopped him from tripping at the UA gates earlier. She looked incredibly nervous, wringing her hands together. The scale of the mock city was breathtaking. It was a sprawling metropolis of concrete and glass, silent and imposing. Massive gates held them back, the tension behind them a palpable force. Izuku took a deep breath, centering himself. He wasn't like the others, who were stretching or showing off their quirks. He was scanning. His eyes darted over the buildings, noting fire escapes, wide avenues, narrow alleys, and potential vantage points. He looked down at the ground, at loose pieces of rubble and discarded metal plates from previous exams. Assets his mind supplied? Potential tools. The nervous girl from before came up to him. Hey! You're the one who was muttering, right? She asked, a friendly smile on her face. I heard that guy call you out. I think it's cool you were taking it so seriously. I'm super nervous. All this waiting is killer. Izuku was momentarily taken aback. His charisma stat was still a dismal D, and friendly, unprompted conversation was a foreign concept. It helps to have a plan, he offered, the words feeling a little stiff in his mouth. Good luck in there. You too, she said, giving him a cheerful thumbs up before turning back to her own nervous preparations. And begin! Present Mick's voice boomed from unseen speakers. The massive gates slid open. For a second, everyone stood frozen in confusion. What's wrong? The test has started. There are no countdowns in a real fight. Run! Run! The dam of examinees broke. A flood of teenagers surged into the city. But Izuku was already gone. The instant the gates had begun to move, he had activated his skills. With agility and parkour flaring in his mind, he didn't run straight. He veered left, leaping onto a low concrete barrier, then onto a dumpster, and in a fluid motion, vaulted a high fence that separated the main street from a narrow maintenance alley. He landed softly on the other side, his steel-toed boots making a muffled thud. While the main pack was still bunched up at the entrance, he was already deep inside the city, alone. Efficiency is key, he thought, his eyes scanning his surroundings. The alley was a treasure trove. It was littered with old pipes, discarded rebar, and metal plating. He needed a weapon. His strength was decent, but it wasn't a quirk that could project force. He needed a medium. His eyes landed on a length of solid steel pipe, about 4 feet long and 1.5 inches thick. It was rusted but solid. He hefted it. It had good weight, good balance. Perfect. A grinding sound echoed from the main street. He peeked around the corner. His first target. A squat, 1-point robot on tank treads rolled into view, its single red optics swiveling back and forth. Izuku focused. Quirk analysis I, or rather, its robot equivalent, kicked in. Target, 1-point villain bot. Armor, light plating, propulsion, track-based. Weakness detected, exposed axle joint between chassis and tread housing. He didn't hesitate. He burst from the alley, closing the 10-meter distance in a handful of powerful strides. The robot's optic fixed on him, a turret swiveling to aim. He didn't give it time. He dropped into a low slide on the pavement, his body a blur of motion. The pipe in his hand, held in a two-handed grip, swung in a tight, vicious arc. Crunch. The steel pipe slammed into the axle joint with the full force of his C-rank strength. Metal shrieked and tore. The robot's tread system seized, and it listed to one side, immobilized. A high-pitched, fizzling noise indicated it was down. 1-point villain bot disabled. 10 XP. A grim smile touched Izuku's lips. It worked. The plan worked. This became his rhythm, his combat loop. He moved through the city like a ghost, a predator hunting machines. He used his parkour skills to stay off the main streets, using rooftops and alleys to flank and ambush his targets. He became a master of the urban environment, a stark contrast to the other examinees who were engaging in flashy, head-on battles in the open. He encountered a 2-pointer, a bipedal model with pincer-like arms. Target, 2-point villain bot. Armor, medium plating. Weakness detected, unarmored hydraulic lines in elbow and knee joints. Sensor cluster on back of head. He dodged its clumsy pincer lunge, used the robot's own arm as a ramp, and ran up its back. He brought the pipe down twice in a brutal, precise combination, smashing the sensor cluster. The robot shuddered and went limp, its red optic fading to black. 2-point villain bot disabled. 20 XP. He could hear the sounds of the other battles raging around him. Bakugo, he imagined, was a maelstrom of explosions, likely racking up an immense score through sheer destructive power. Aoyama was probably firing his naval laser from a safe distance. Izuku's method was slower, more deliberate, but it was also incredibly efficient in terms of stamina. His SP bar, thanks to Endurance 2, was still well over 80%. He dispatched another 1-pointer, then a 3-pointer that was giving another student trouble. This one was a spider-like robot with heavy armor. His analysis revealed a ventilation port on its underbelly. He slid underneath it, a dangerous move, and thrust the pipe upwards into the vent, shattering the internal cooling fans. The robot overheated and shut down in a cloud of steam. 3-point villain bot disabled. 35 XP. Assist bonus 5 XP. Points. 1213 is equal to 7. He kept a running tally. His movements were fluid, his mind clear. Each takedown was a puzzle, and he was solving them one by one. The 10 months of grinding, of hauling trash and running on sand, had prepared him for this. This was no different from clearing the beach. The robots were just heavier, more mobile pieces of junk. Minutes flew by. His score climbed steadily. 28, 31. 36, 41. He was a machine of quiet competence, invisible to the judges who were likely focused on the spectacular displays of power in the city's center. He was just fine with that. And then, the ground began to shake. It started as a low, deep tremor, a vibration that ran up through the soles of his boots. It grew rapidly into a violent quake, rattling windows and shaking rubble from the tops of buildings. A shadow fell over the street he was on, a shadow so vast it plunged the entire block into twilight. Izuku looked up, his pipe held at the ready. His eyes widened. Rising from behind a block of 5-story buildings was the 0-point obstacle. It was bigger than he could have possibly imagined. A colossal behemoth of dark metal and red optics, it towered over the cityscape, its head scraping the clouds. It was less a robot and more a walking skyscraper, a monument to overwhelming force. The other examinees in the vicinity had one universal reaction: they ran. They screamed and scattered, a mad scramble to get away from the lumbering, pointless threat. It was the smart move. The logical move. Izuku began to back away as well. His internal analysis was screaming at him. Threat level, legendary. Recommended action, immediate retreat. He had a good score. There was no reason to engage. Then he heard it. A small, pained cry. Ow! He whipped his head around. Near the base of the colossal robot, half buried under a pile of rubble from a collapsed wall, was the girl from the gate. Achiko Uraraka. Her leg was pinned, and she was looking up at the approaching robot with wide, terrified eyes. The world went silent. The panicked shouts of the others faded into a dull roar. The system's warnings vanished. All he could see was a person in danger. A person who needed a hero, the sludge villain. Kaken's terrified eyes. His own desperate, foolish charge. His legs were moving before he made a conscious decision. But this time, it wasn't a blind, reckless sprint. This time, he had tools. This time, he had a plan. He didn't charge the robot's chest. He didn't aim for its head. He ran towards it, but his mind was on fire. His quirk analysis eye skill pushed to its absolute limit. He needed more. He needed to see what wasn't obvious. He poured his mental energy, his focus points, into the analysis, demanding an answer. Insufficient data for full analysis. Upgrade skill? Diverting all available FP to temporary skill evolution. Focus points. 220 to 150 80 to 10. New sub-skill unlocked. Weak point detection. His vision shimmered. The world was overlaid with a translucent blue grid. The zero-pointer was no longer just a mass of metal. It was a schematic. Lines of data streamed across its form, highlighting armor thicknesses, power conduits, and structural supports. And then, he saw it. On the outside of the robot's left leg, about 10 feet from the ground, was a large, rectangular panel marked with a series of complex warning labels. It glowed in his vision with a faint, pulsing red light. Critical weakness detected. Target: primary leg actuator maintenance panel. Armor: reinforced, but external placement creates vulnerability to focused kinetic impact at hinge points. Result of disabling: catastrophic joint lock. Loss of motor function in limb. He had it. The instruction manual. The solution. He couldn't destroy it. He couldn't even scratch its main armor. But he could cripple it. He could jam the joint. He needed to hit that panel, hard, with a focused burst of energy. His body was already weak. He had been fighting for nearly 10 minutes. But he had one last trick up his sleeve, a well of power he hadn't yet tapped. His STR was C rank, but what if he could focus all of it, and more, into a single point? What if he could turn his pipe from a blunt instrument into a kinetic spear? He channeled the thought, the desire, the absolute need for that power. He felt the energy welling up from his core, the teachings of basic physical conditioning and strength too providing the pathway. He pushed it down his arms, into the metal pipe he held clutched in his hands. He was willing a new skill into existence. The system, as always, responded to his resolve. New skill created through battlefield improvisation and sheer force of will. Skill unlocked, kinetic strike eye. Cost 50 SP. Effect: gathers and focuses kinetic energy into a single point of contact through a held object or limb. Greatly increases penetration and impact force. The steel pipe in his hands began to hum, a low-frequency vibration that he felt all the way up to his shoulders. A faint, shimmering aura of blue energy, visible only to him, enveloped the weapon. The zero-pointer took another thunderous step, its massive foot crashing down perilously close to Uraraka. Debris rained down around her. "Hey!" Izuku screamed, his voice raw. He needed its attention. Just for a second, the robot's enormous head swiveled, its single, building-sized red optic fixing on the tiny, defiant human charging it. That was all he needed. Using his parkour eye skill, he leaped onto a large piece of shattered wall, using the upward slope to launch himself into the air. He soared, a green and black blur against the chaos. For a moment, he was level with his target, the glowing red maintenance panel. He twisted his body midair, putting all his momentum, all his strength, and all the focused energy of his new skill into one final, desperate blow. "Hi-ya!" he roared, slamming the energized pipe directly into the panel's hinge. It wasn't the thunderous explosion of one of Bakugo's blasts. It was a sound far more intimate and violating. A deafening, high-pitched screech of tortured metal, a sickening crunch as the reinforced hinges buckled and snapped. The panel was driven inwards, jamming the complex machinery of the knee joint. The zero-pointer's leg froze mid-stride. For a moment, the colossal machine was frozen, an impossible statue defying gravity. Then, its own immense, forward momentum took over. With its left leg locked and immobile, it couldn't compensate. It began to topple, not forward onto Uraraka, but sideways, like a felled tree. It crashed into an entire block of empty buildings with a cataclysmic, earth-shattering roar of collapsing steel and concrete. A tidal wave of dust and debris billowed out from the impact. Izuku hit the ground in a clumsy roll, the impact jarring every bone in his body. His SP and FP bars were flashing a critical, angry red. The pipe clattered from his numb fingers. He was utterly, completely drained. He pushed himself to his knees, panting, his vision swimming. The robot was down. Uraraka was safe. A loud, klaxon-like buzzer echoed through the city. "Time's up!" Silence descended, broken only by the groaning of stressed metal from the fallen giant, and Izuku's own ragged breathing. He had done it. He felt a light touch on his shoulder. He looked up to see Uraraka standing over him, her face a mixture of awe, concern, and profound gratitude. "That was amazing," she breathed. "You saved me." "Thank you." She looked like she was about to be sick, and quickly used her quirk on herself to stave it off. Izuku could only manage a weak nod, a tired smile touching his lips. He pushed himself to his feet, his legs shaking. "Are you okay? My ankle's pinned, but I think I can get it," she began, but before she could finish, a small, elderly woman in a hero costume with a giant syringe cane was upon them. "Recovery girl. All right, move aside, dearie," she said, shooing Uraraka. She peered at Izuku. "That was quite the stunt, sonny. Clever, but reckless. Are you injured?" "Just tired," Izuku managed to gasp out. In the distance, standing on a rooftop overlooking the scene, Bakugo stared, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He had seen the whole thing. He had been racking up an insane number of points, reveling in his own overwhelming power, when the zero-pointer appeared. He saw the round-faced girl get trapped. And then he saw Deku. He had expected the useless nerd to run. Or maybe to try something stupid and suicidal, like he did with the sludge villain. But this was different. Deku hadn't charged in blindly. He had moved with a plan. He had used a piece of junk as a weapon. He had leaped with an acrobat's grace. And that final strike, it wasn't a clumsy punch. It was precise. It was calculated. It was smart. Deku hadn't overpowered the robot. He had outthought it. He had taken it down with a single, surgical strike that Bakugo couldn't even begin to comprehend. What the hell was that? What was that quirk? It wasn't one thing. It was agility, it was strength, it was some kind of weapon power-up, it was analytical. The sight filled Bakugo not with anger, but with a cold, terrifying confusion that was far, far worse. The Deku he knew, the pebble he had kicked around his entire life, was gone. In his place was someone, something, he didn't understand. And it scared him. Izuku, oblivious to Bakugo's turmoil, felt a series of chimes ring in his mind, the sweetest sound he had ever heard. Heroic quest completed. Rescue a trapped examinee. 1000 XP. Hidden objective achieved. Strategic takedown of a high-tier threat. 2500 XP. Level up. Level 16 reached. Level up. Level 17 reached. All stats increased. HP/SP/FP fully restored. 2 skill points awarded. The exhaustion vanished in an instant, replaced by the familiar, warm surge of a level up. He felt incredible. His final villain point score was 41. Respectable, but probably not in the top 10. He hadn't earned a single point for defeating the zero-pointer. But as he looked at the fallen behemoth, at the safe and sound Uraraka being tended to by Recovery Girl, and at the 2 new, gleaming skill points waiting in his interface, he knew, with absolute certainty, that he had passed. He had faced the ultimate test not with borrowed power, but with skills he had earned, a mind he had honed, and a body he had built. He was exhausted, but he stood tall, a deep and profound satisfaction settling in his soul. His journey to becoming a hero had truly begun. A week later, Izuku sat at a scarred wooden desk in classroom 1A of UA High School, the acceptance letter, a holographic projection from a beaming All Might, still a vivid, triumphant memory. He ran a hand over the smooth surface of the desk, the reality of it all still sinking in. He was here. He had made it. His dream, once a distant, mocking star, was now the room he was sitting in, the air he was breathing. The classroom was a cacophony of nervous energy and burgeoning egos. He recognized several faces from the exam. The serious boy with the engines was attempting to reprimand Bakugo for having his feet on the desk, an effort that was as brave as it was spectacularly futile. Kaken, radiating pure belligerence, was sneering at him, creating a small bubble of intimidation that no one dared breach. The kind, round-faced girl, Achiko Uraraka, was there, and she gave him a bright, welcoming wave from across the room, which he returned with a small, slightly awkward smile. His quirk analysis was running on a low, passive hum, a new and constant part of his awareness. It catalogued the students as they filtered in: a girl who was invisible, a boy with a bird head, another with multiple arms. It was a fascinating, data-rich environment. A small notification popped into his vision. New quest generated. First day at UA. Objective: survive your first day as a hero in training. Rewards 500 XP? Izuku quirked an eyebrow. Survive? It seemed a bit dramatic for what was essentially orientation day. The classroom door slid open, revealing a figure that immediately silenced the entire room. He was a man who looked like he had just rolled out of a sleeping bag after a 3-day bender. Tall, with a wild mane of black hair, bloodshot eyes, and a scarf that seemed to have a life of its own wrapped around his neck. He looked less like a teacher and more like a homeless man who had wandered into the wrong building. It took you 8 seconds to quiet down, the man said, his voice a monotone, soul-draining drone. Life is not so generous with its time. You are all wasting it. He unzipped the yellow sleeping bag he was somehow still half inside of and stepped out, revealing a simple black outfit. I'm Shota Aizawa. I'm your homeroom teacher. The collective shock in the room was a palpable thing. This was a pro-hero. Their teacher? Aizawa's tired, bored gaze swept across the classroom, and Izuku felt a strange prickle on his skin as those eyes passed over him. It was a feeling of being seen, of being analyzed right back. Name: Shota Aizawa. Hero name: Eraserhead. Quirk: Erasure. Type: Emitter. Function: can temporarily erase the quirk of anyone within his line of sight. Effect is broken upon blinking. Observation: severe dry eye is a chronic side effect. The capture weapon, Scarf, is a necessary tool to compensate for lack of personal offensive power while a target's quirk is nullified. A highly skilled, logic-based underground hero. Avoid direct eye contact in a confrontation. 15 int XP. This was a high-value target. Right. Aizawa continued, his voice devoid of any enthusiasm. Put these on and meet me on the field. He held up a blue UA gym uniform. No time for orientations or welcoming ceremonies. UA isn't a regular school. We're here to make you heroes, and we don't have time to waste on pleasantries. The locker room was a buzz of confusion and speculation. A quirk apprehension test on the first day. Is that normal? Kaminari, a boy with a lightning bolt in his hair, asked the room at large. UA's curriculum is known for being unconventional, replied the engine-legged boy, whose name Izuku now knew was Tenya Ida. We must trust in the judgment of our instructors. Izuku changed quickly and quietly. His new physique didn't go unnoticed. When he pulled his shirt on, Kirishima, a redhead with a sharp-toothed grin, gave him a friendly clap on the shoulder that would have sent the old Izuku stumbling. Whoa, Midoriya! You're surprisingly ripped, he exclaimed. What's your quirk? Some kind of strength enhancer? Izuku froze for a second. This was it. The question he knew was coming. He'd spent hours rehearsing this in his head, trying to formulate a description that was both true and misleading. Something like that, he said, forcing a casual tone. It's complicated. It was a weak deflection, but thankfully, the call to assemble on the field prevented any follow-up questions. They gathered under the bright sun, 20 students in their new uniforms, facing a teacher who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Right. Aizawa began, holding up a small device. You've been doing these since middle school. Standardized physical fitness tests. But you were never allowed to use your quirks. Here, that's the entire point. We need a baseline for your potential. He looked directly at Bakugo. Bakugo, you got the top score in the practical exam. What was your best softball throw in middle school? 67 meters. Bakugo grunted, his hands in his pockets. Try it with your quirk. Aizawa tossed him a softball. Bakugo strode into the chalk circle, a wicked grin spreading across his face. He wound up, his palm crackling with small detonations. Die! He screamed, hurling the ball. It wasn't just a throw, it was a launch. He triggered a massive explosion at the point of release, propelling the ball into the sky as if shot from a cannon. It became a tiny speck before arcing back down moments later. Aizawa held up his device. It beeped. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in gasps and exclamations. Whoa! 705 meters? That's awesome! This is going to be fun! Uraraka chirped. Fun? Aizawa's voice was suddenly laced with venom. The temperature on the field seemed to drop by 10 degrees. You think this is fun? You think spending the next 3 years facing down villains who want to kill you is going to be fun? You think clawing your way to the top of a brutal, oversaturated profession is a game? His eyes glowed with a faint red light, his hair levitating around his head, the scarf beginning to uncoil. The playful atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a suffocating dread. Fine. Let's make this fun. The student who scores the lowest in these 8 tests will be judged to have 0 potential. He smiled, a terrifying, humorless baring of teeth. And I will expel them immediately. The quest notification in Izuku's mind flashed. The objective hadn't changed, but the stakes had become crystal clear. Survive. Panic swept through the students. Expulsion? On the first day? This was insane. This is a logical deception to push us to our limits, Ida declared, though his voice trembled slightly. Uraraka, however, pointed out that Aizawa had the authority to do it. The fear was real. Izuku's heart was pounding, but his mind was clear. This wasn't a deception. Aizawa was the kind of man who would absolutely do it. He was establishing dominance, and weeding out anyone who wasn't 100% committed from the very start. It was ruthless. It was logical. This was a boss battle, and Aizawa was the boss. The first test was the 50-meter dash. Izuku was paired with Ida. Ida got into a sprinter's stance, his engines rumbling. Izuku simply stood, his body poised. The starting pistol fired. Agility 2 activated. He had leveled up his agility after the exam. The world seemed to slow for a fraction of a second as he pushed off. He wasn't as fast as Ida, whose recipro burst propelled him across the line in just over 3 seconds. But Izuku was fast. He crossed the line in 5.49 seconds, a time that would be respectable for a track star, but was decidedly middle of the pack here. It was a good, solid start. Next, grip strength. He gripped the device. He could feel the solidness of his bones, the density of his muscles. But he had an ace up his sleeve. He had unlocked a new skill in the path of the Guardian Tree. Reinforced Self-I, active, cost, 20 SP per minute, effect, temporarily hardens biological tissue, increasing durability and physical resistance. He activated it. A wave of energy flowed into his hand, making his grip feel like a vice. He squeezed. The device whined in protest. 108 kilograms. Solid. Better than average. But then he saw Shoji, the 6-armed student, wrap 3 hands around it, and shatter the 500 kilograms limit. Izuku was beginning to see the landscape of this class. It was a class of specialists. Bakugo had overwhelming power. Ida had peerless speed. Shoji had immense strength. He, on the other hand, was a generalist. A jack of all trades. In a class of cannons and race cars, he was a Swiss Army knife. He wouldn't top the charts in any single event, but he wouldn't be at the bottom, either. Standing long jump, he used agility 2 and a burst of strength to clear the sandbox easily. Side-to-side steps, again, agility 2 let him post a high score, his endurance 2 preventing any fatigue. He was consistently placing in the 8th to 12th range. Safe. secure. He was surviving. Then came the ball throw. This was the test Aizawa had used to make his point. It was the test of explosive, quirk-based power. And Izuku's power wasn't explosive. He watched Uraraka tap the ball, making it weightless, and throw it into the stratosphere, scoring an infinity symbol. He watched Aoyama fire the ball from his naval laser, achieving a decent but oddly short distance. Then it was his turn. He stepped into the circle, the familiar softball feeling heavy in his hand. The class watched him. He was the enigma. The guy who was surprisingly fit but hadn't done anything particularly flashy. What was his quirk? He could feel Aizawa's gaze on him, heavy and analytical. This was the moment of truth. He couldn't get an infinite score. But he couldn't afford to be average either. He had to demonstrate his potential, his unique brand of power. He took a deep breath and began to call upon his skills. First, he activated reinforced self-eye on his arm and shoulder, feeling the muscles and tendons harden, preparing them for the strain. Second, he activated a new skill he purchased with his other post-exam point. It was the counterpart to his self-buff, a skill he knew he would need. Reinforce Object Eye, active, cost, 20 FP, effect, temporarily infuses an inanimate object with energy, increasing its durability and integrity. He channeled the energy into the softball. He could feel it become harder, denser, less likely to tear apart from the forces he was about to apply. Finally, as he began his wind-up, he gathered his power for his signature move. Kinetic Strike Eye. A faint blue aura, visible only to him, coalesced around his hand and the ball. He wasn't just throwing it. He was preparing to launch it. This was the synergy he had been practicing in his mind. Guardian skills to prepare the vessel, warrior skills to provide the force. He threw. Just as the ball left his fingertips, Aizawa's eyes flared red. His hair flew up. His scarf twitched, and Izuku's power vanished. The reinforced self-skill winked out. The reinforced object skill dissipated. The kinetic strike fizzled into nothingness. The blue aura around the ball was gone. It was just a normal throw, from a normal, if fit, teenager. The ball flew a pathetic 46 meters. Izuku stumbled forward, shock coursing through him. He stared at his hand, then at the ball lying limply on the field. What had happened? His skills, they were just gone. A system error? A bug? I erased your quirk. Aizawa's deadpan voice cut through his confusion. Izuku turned to see the hero's capture weapon snaking through the air, wrapping around his torso and arms, binding him tightly. The teacher's eyes were glowing with a terrifying crimson intensity. That ridiculous display at the entrance exam, a suicidal, last-ditch move, Aizawa said, his voice low and dangerous as he pulled Izuku closer. A power that injures you with every use. Are you planning on becoming a liability? Forcing someone to come and save you every time you decide to play the hero? Izuku's mind was racing. Aizawa had completely misinterpreted what he'd done. He thought Izuku had some kind of self-destructive strength enhancer, like a low-rent one for all. He had seen the aftermath of the zero-pointer fight. Izuku, exhausted and on his knees, and drawn the most logical, but entirely wrong, conclusion. He thought Izuku's quirk broke his body. The problem was, Aizawa's quirk, erasure, had worked. Izuku's skills weren't a biological function that could be nullified. So how? He reread the analysis in his head. Erases the quirk of anyone within his line of sight. The system itself, his skill tree, it wasn't just a power. The system was his quirk. Aizawa wasn't erasing kinetic strike. He was erasing the entire metaphysical engine that allowed Izuku to use it. This was a terrifying, vital piece of information. Let me guess, Aizawa continued, his grip tightening. You can't control it. So you plan to break your arm, disable one opponent, and be taken out of the fight. That's not what being a hero is, kid, Izuku had to correct him. He had to show him. That's not it, Izuku said, his voice strained from the binding scarf. My quirk, it doesn't injure me. I was just exhausted. I can control it. Aizawa's glare was pure skepticism. Prove it. He released the capture weapon. I've returned your quirk. You have one more throw. Show me you're not a one-trick pony, or your time at UA ends now. The pressure was immense. The entire class was watching in stunned silence. Aizawa thought he was a self-destructive fool. Izuku had one chance to demonstrate the truth of his power, its versatility and control. He walked back to the circle, his heart pounding a steady, determined rhythm. He couldn't use the same move. That would just prove Aizawa's point about him being a one-trick pony. He needed to show intelligence. He needed to show synergy. He picked up the ball. This time, he didn't focus all his energy on raw power. He ran a new simulation in his mind. He took his stance. He activated Reinforce Object Eye on the ball again. He felt the familiar flow of FP. He saw Aizawa's eyes narrow, but they weren't glowing yet. Good. Then, he reached into his warrior tree. Not for kinetic strike, but for something else. He visualized a different application of force. Not a punch, but a spin. He wound up, but instead of a straight throw, he put a massive, unnatural spin on the ball, channeling a fraction of his STR into the rotational velocity. As he released it, he activated a modified, low-power kinetic strike, not as a punch, but as a continuous, gentle push in the direction of the spin. The ball flew, and Aizawa's eyes flared red again. He was erasing his quirk. But it was too late. The ball was already in the air. The initial forces had already been applied. The ball didn't fly in a perfect, powerful arc. It flew like a trick pitch from hell. The massive spin, stabilized by the reinforce object skill, created a gyroscopic effect. It curved violently to the left, then, as the kinetic push wore off and the spin interacted with the air, it dipped and curved back to the right, flying far further than a normal throw due to the Magnus effect he had just ridiculously amplified. It landed with a soft thud, far down the field. Aizawa held up his device. It beeped. 256.7 meters. It wasn't 705 meters. It wasn't infinity. But it was a damn good score. More importantly, it was a score achieved not through brute, self-destructive force, but through a clever, controlled application of physics-bending power. And Izuku was standing perfectly fine in the circle, not a single bone broken. He hadn't even broken a sweat. Aizawa stared at the reading, then at Izuku. The corner of his mouth twitched, a barely perceptible movement that might have been the start of a smile before it was ruthlessly suppressed. "I see," he said, his voice back to its usual monotone. "You're not a complete idiot then." He turned away. "The demonstration is over. Finish the last two tests." Izuku let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He had passed the real test. The rest of the class was staring at him with a mixture of confusion and awe. "Dude, what even is your quirk?" Kaminari asked, his mind clearly blown. "First you almost bust your arm, then you throw a super curveball?" Izuku needed a name. An explanation. He thought back to his initial analysis. It was a system. A system of skills. "I call it Systema," he said, the lie tasting surprisingly natural. "It's a versatile skill manifestation quirk. It lets me learn and apply different physical and mental skills. It's not one single power." It was the perfect explanation. It was vague enough to cover anything he might do, and it framed his abilities in a way people could understand. It wasn't a skill tree, it was just him manifesting skills. The final tests, sit-ups and the long-distance run, were a breeze. His endurance too was practically made for them. He finished the run easily, not even winded, landing him another solid upper-middle placement. When the final scores were tallied, he was in 11th place. Right in the middle. Perfectly safe. The student in last place was the invisible girl, Toru Hagakure. She was on the verge of tears. "And by the way," Aizawa said, a wicked glint in his eye as he dismissed the scoreboard. "The expulsion thing was a logical deception," the class erupted. "What? Of course it was a lie!" exclaimed a black-haired girl with a spiky ponytail. "It was just to draw out our best performances." "She's sharp," Izuku noted. Quirk analysis. I tagged her. Name, Momo Yaoyorozu. Quirk, creation. A powerful and incredibly versatile quirk. Her intelligence must be off the charts to use it effectively. Aizawa dismissed them, telling them to check the syllabus in the classroom. As they filed away, Izuku felt a presence behind him. "Deku," he turned. It was Bakugo. His red eyes were burning with an intensity that Izuku hadn't seen since the sludge incident. It wasn't just anger. It was a deep, simmering confusion. "What the hell is that quirk?" Bakugo growled, his voice low and threatening. He jabbed a finger at Izuku's chest. "Don't give me that system of bullshit. It's not one power. You were quirkless your entire life. I watched you. You never showed a hint of anything. You've been lying to me. To everyone." The old Izuku would have flinched, stammered, backed away. But the boy standing before Bakugo now was forged in the fires of the Dagobah grind. He had faced down a 100-foot robot, and a hero who could erase his very existence. Bakugo's rage felt manageable. Izuku met his gaze without flinching. His expression was calm, his posture relaxed. "It's my power, Kaken," he said, his voice even. He didn't try to explain the delayed activation. He didn't try to justify himself. He simply stated a fact. That's all. He held Bakugo's furious gaze for a second longer, then turned and walked away, leaving a sputtering, utterly bewildered Bakugo in his wake. For the first time in his life, Izuku had won their confrontation, not by fighting, but by refusing to be intimidated. He had his own power now. He didn't need Bakugo's approval, or fear his scorn. Later that day, in the dimly lit teacher's lounge, Shota Aizawa stared at a monitor, replaying the footage of Izuku's ball throw. He played it in slow motion, watching the strange, subtle energies at play. He had felt it when he'd used erasure. It wasn't like nullifying a simply emitter quirk. It felt deeper, more fundamental. Like he was unplugging something rather than just flipping a switch. The door hissed open, and a small, furry figure entered, carrying a cup of tea. "An interesting first day, wouldn't you say, Aizawa?" Principal Nizu chirped, hopping onto a stool. "That kid!" "Midoriya," Aizawa said, not taking his eyes off the screen. "His quirk isn't on any registry. It manifested late, which is rare but not unheard of. But its nature, it's an anomaly." "Indeed," Nizu said, his black eyes gleaming with intellectual delight. "I reviewed his entrance exam performance myself. He defeated the zero-pointer not with overwhelming force, but with a calculated, precise attack on a structural weakness that no one else even thought to look for. And today, when you erased his power, he adapted. He didn't try the same trick twice. He used a different application, one based on physics and control rather than raw output. He called it Systema." Aizawa grunted. "A skill manifestation quirk. It's too broad. Too clean. It feels like a cover story for something else. And isn't that just wonderful?" Nizu took a long sip of his tea, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "A puzzle. A student with a developing, seemingly limitless tactical power that even you can't fully comprehend. He's not the strongest. He's not the fastest. But he might just be the most dangerous of them all." Aizawa leaned back, running a hand through his messy hair. The kid was a headache. A mystery box. But Nizu was right. He wasn't just another student with a flashy power. He was something new. "I'll keep an eye on him," Aizawa said. "Oh, I know you will," Nizu replied, his smile widening. "We all will." In a file cabinet across the room, a new folder was created. It was thin, containing only a single sheet of paper. But at the top, in crisp black print, was the name, Izuju Midoriya, and underneath, a single, handwritten annotation from the principal himself, Project Chimera. "Observe and cultivate."